Hi, I'm Christina Cole. Thank you for joining me. We're going to be talking about aging gracefully and the tools that I use to help my clients move into a healing process and kind of uncover some of the areas that we get stuck in as we are aging because certain things in our body start to slow down. We start to feel more symptomatic and we have a harder time getting answers that go beyond you're just getting older, right? Nobody wants to hear you're just getting older and this is how it's going to be. There really are answers on how to feel better in your body. And we're going to go through some of that information today. So I'm going to bring up my presentation for you and I'm going to disappear behind the screen just so I don't interrupt you by staring over in the corner, right? All right. So this is my presentation on metabolic wellness and how it really is the key to aging gracefully and the tools and steps that we're going to take in order to achieve that. So one of the first things I want to bring up is kind of how do we assess how we're doing? How do I determine how someone's feeling and what are their greatest healing opportunities? So I use a tool called a metabolic chaos scorecard. This was designed by Reed Davis, the founder of Functional Diagnostic Nutrition. And it is such a valuable tool because it allows us to track through time something that's very subjective. So how I feel in my body, how you feel in your body, it's going to be different. And it's hard to say how you're feeling over that time frame. Not to mention, we tend to forget how we were feeling. And so this series of questions really helps us identify how our total score looks, as well as how those scores get broken into these different areas of the body, right? Hormone, immune, digestion, detoxification, or energy production, nervous system, as well as oxidative stress. I like to call this hidden O. I also have a list of main complaints up at the top, and this allows both myself and the client to stay on target with what they are looking to heal. What are their priorities in the healing process? I typically will have somebody complete this as part of their onboarding program. And then when we get towards the end of a protocol, which usually is about 90 days. In this situation, I had somebody checking in. So we did it after their first month of working together. So we have our first test score, and then we have a secondary test score. And it was really used to just to check in. How's it going? Where are we seeing improvement? Where do we see a need for a little bit more attention? So this can be a pretty useful tool in a practice and for you as the client. Now, with my clients, I like to use this to really talk about that interconnectedness. I will typically put the scores from that metabolic chaos scorecard into these bubbles. And I find that is a really good visual tool for us to understand the interconnectedness of the body. In traditional medicine, we tend to compartmentalize the body and we'll look at just our hormones, or maybe we're looking at just our GI stuff. And the reality is that our body works collectively. And if we ignore that collective process, then we're ignoring the better healing opportunities. And so, as you can see, we have a lot of symptomology around the outside of this. And we can see that they also contribute towards one another. That's why we have these arrows that go both back and forth between that center bubble and these variety of areas that kind of have their own specialty. Now, the reason the center says cortisol and DHEA is because that is our stress response. Cortisol is our main stress hormone. If we have enough of it, we feel good. We can think clearly and act quickly. And we have to have a rebuilding process, which is what that DHEA comes into. So it becomes really important for our cortisol and DHEA to be in good balance. And when they're not, it impacts the rest of our sex hormones, and it also impacts all of these other areas in our body. So that's one of the primary things that I look for. I want to see how's that cortisol production throughout the day, and how is that impacting the rest of your sex hormones. Most of my clients come to me because they've had their labs run. Everything looks normal, things look great, but they don't feel like things are great. They don't feel like things are normal. They can definitely tell there are some changes happening in their body, and they're struggling because they haven't really come to a place where they can be diagnosed with something. And blood chemistry labs are traditionally used as a diagnostic tool. They are used to help understand if somebody falls out of specific ranges. And if they do, then there's an opportunity for some type of an intervention from a Western perspective. What I like to use is more functional labs. These labs use different types of body fluids, for lack of a better word, to tell us what's going on. So I do a stress and hormone profile, which is a salivary test. I also do a dried urine test, a blood spot test, and a stool test. Lots of fun stuff, but I'm not collecting any of it. The client is sending that stuff off directly to the lab. So that's great for all of us. But it does give me really good insight into the missing opportunities that are available for us to heal. And that's what I'm looking for. What are these gaps? How do we start to refill those buckets and bring up the optimization inside the body? Lifestyle ends up playing a very big role in this. The types of foods that we're eating, the amount of sleep that we're getting, the quality of sleep that we're getting, the movement that we are or maybe or not doing, as well as our stress load. All of those things do play a pretty big role in how your body functions. So here's some examples of these labs that I utilize. And we do have a motto. It's called "We Test, Don't Guess." And that's because you can go and get labs run by all kinds of different practitioners. I've had lots of clients come to me and they ask their chiropractor to run a couple labs for them. Maybe they've gone to another practitioner and they had one or two labs run. And labs give us so much great information, but it is the collection that makes what I do a little bit differently. I'm not looking to treat labs any more than I'm looking to treat symptoms. What I'm looking is how do I put all of this information together and then create a healing protocol for someone. And that healing protocol does need to include diet, rest, exercise, stress reduction. So lots of different methods of helping to reduce the stress, as well as some key supplementation that helps kind of fill some of the holes that we have. We like to call it that intentional allopathic care that kind of refills some of our buckets so that we can move forward without having to have a lot of supplements. Because the goal is not for you to just be on a boatload of supplements into infinity. They serve a purpose and you have an off ramp. And I think that off ramp is so important. So here are some things to note. What happens? What's happening as we start to age? Well, unfortunately, we have a lot of processes that start to slow down, and that happens particularly in our digestive system. It ends up impacting our ability to absorb our nutrients. It impacts our immune function, our detox pathways, and that microbial balance in your GI system. So what are some areas that get impacted? Well, we end up with reduced stomach acid. And when we have reduced stomach acid, we're not breaking down the foods very well. We end up having too large of food particles trying to move their way through our intestinal system. It creates a lovely environment for a particular spiral bacterium called Heliobacter pylori, affectionately called H. pylori. Now, H. pylori in and of itself isn't always a problem, but it can become a problem. It can start to bring along virulence factors. It can, like I like to say, it brings friends to the party. And when that happens, it really starts to create a poor environment for our digestive system. It makes a great environment for bacterial overgrowth, and it will start to cause a lot of downstream problems, including things like stomach ulcers and stomach cancer. So it's important to know how much H. pylori might be residing in your microbiome and if it's time for it to get moved along. We also will have our slower motility. So constipation. This is one of those fun things that happens as we get older. And this leads to gut microbiome imbalances. We can end up with too high of certain bacteria and too low of other bacteria. When that happens, it starts to contribute towards leaky gut, which leads to greater food sensitivities, but it also creates a pathway for pathogens, parasites, candida, and liver congestion. We're going to talk a little bit more about liver congestion later. It also impairs our enzyme and bile production. So we have a pancreatic enzyme. Its job is to help with that bile flow, and it helps with that digestive process and really starts to move things down different pathways in order for our body to have the resources necessary. So our gallbladder is often impacted when this is a problem. And then when you don't have a gallbladder anymore, you're going to have a lot more liver congestion and you're going to have a much tougher time breaking down your proteins and your fats. And then we'll have our mucosal immunity decline. So 70% of your immune system lives in the gut, which is why it's so important that we have the right bacteria in the right amounts. And this includes your entire body, right? So the mucosal lining, a lot of times we think about it as just in our GI system, but it is actually a thin layer of epithelial cells that covers, basically protects the inside world from our outside world. So it's our eyes, ears, nose, throat, our mouth, lungs. It is that long tube that goes from the mouth to the anus. It is intact skin. It's the vagina, it's the penis. It's truly that separation between the inside and the outside. And so we can have symptomology coming up through our GI system that maybe ends up impacting your respiratory care. One of the things that I will look at is how much secretory IgA do we have available? Are we having it on high alert? Is it feeling depleted? How can I help somebody with that immune function? And then we need to have a good microbiome diversity. And that balance will tend to shift when we start to have too many of the bad guys and not enough of the good guys. And then our detoxification process definitely becomes impacted. Our liver will become congested and we will have a harder time moving out parasites, pathogens, old hormones, and all of that will impact your energy. All of that will impact your sleep and how you feel on a daily basis. So why do I use the labs that I use? So I use a stress and hormone profile because it does give me insight into your stress response and how your sex hormones are faring. If we are really prioritizing cortisol, we are typically not spending a lot of resources going downstream into your sex hormones being DHEA might be getting sidelined. It may not be moving into testosterone or estradiol, progesterone. All of those things impact your sleep. They impact how you're feeling. And we then are prioritizing just having enough cortisol to get the job done, to get out of bed, do all the things you need to do. And that's going to end up slowing your digestion. It's going to end up slowing your detox pathways. I do look at the metabolic wellness profile because I want to see how well are you digesting your proteins. Proteins are an absolute elemental part of our processing and building blocks in the body. How is your liver doing? How much detoxification do we need to address? And oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is a contributor to all the degenerative diseases that we can get. So things like type 2 diabetes, dementia, cancer, cardiovascular disease. And then our mucosal barrier, how much leaky gut do we have going on? And what level of inflammation is coming up in response to that leaky gut? And then lastly, I like to look at the stool test, the GI map, and this tells me what your balance is of your good or your commensal bacteria, what's going on with the opportunistic. Do we have any parasites, pathogens? Do we have yeast or mold growing in our inside of our bodies? And it also gives me some insight into your intestinal health, right? So are you able to digest your fats? Are you able to detox your hormones? Do we have any blood in the stool? How is your immune response happening? So I look at a fecal secretory IgA as well as a salivary one. And I'm also looking for an anti-gliadin marker, which is basically what your responsiveness is to gluten, as well as levels of inflammation in the body. So hormones. What are some things that we're looking for with regards to hormones? So like I've said before, cortisol is our main stress hormone, and DHEA is the rebuilding side of that team. So I like to say cortisol is burning the house down, and DHEA is in there working hard, trying to rebuild all the things that we've burned down. And there's some symptomology that you might recognize when these are out of balance. So if we are cortisol dominant, we will have feelings of fatigue, foggy thinking. We're probably going to have some sleep disruptions. We might have depression, joint pain. We might be experiencing a lot of headaches. And if we're DHEA dominant or really moving down that anabolic rebuilding backside, we might be feeling irritable, anger. We have a harder time calming down. Maybe you're experiencing anxiety or maybe some aggressive behavior. And aggressive behavior, I really like to say, we become easily triggered. The little things in life are suddenly super annoying. Like the person sitting next to you should not be chewing their food that way. Or maybe they shouldn't even be breathing, right? They're just like, you're annoying, you have to leave the room. Some things that we might notice with progesterone, testosterone, and estradiol. So progesterone is a really unique feel-good hormone. Its job is to help us relax, and it reduces inflammation, and it helps keep the anabolic effects of estrogen in check, which is very important. The other thing that's really unique about progesterone is that it has the capacity to go down either the catabolic or cortisol branch or the anabolic or DHEA branch. And that means that it kind of is neutral, right? It doesn't pick teams, and it can get converted either way, which is why you'll often hear people getting, oh, you need more progesterone. Progesterone is the answer. When maybe it's a little more upstream, and maybe it's a cortisol to DHEA ratio that is disrupting that downstream into our progesterone. Progesterone really downstreams into DHEA and then into testosterone and estradiol. So what happens if our progesterone is out of balance? If we have elevations in progesterone, it can contribute towards feelings of sleepiness. We can have breast swelling and tenderness. We can have a decreased libido. We might have some mild depression. And there does tend to be a correlation between high progesterone and candida infections. Now, conversely, when we have low progesterone, we might have hot flashes, night sweats, vaginal dryness, memory lapses, bone loss, incontinence, tearfulness, depression, sleep disruptions, and many people will experience heart palpitations, which kind of lends to them thinking, oh, they're having an anxiety attack, when maybe that anxiety is truly from having a hormone imbalance and maybe not enough progesterone. Now, when we look at testosterone and estradiol, these are key components for both men and women. And we want to make sure that they stay in balance, and we don't want to be dominant in either one of these. They start to cause different types of problems for us. So testosterone, as an example, is helpful for recovery, for muscle building, and for mental acuity. When we have high testosterone, it can lead to excessive facial or body hair. It can increase loss of scalp hair. We can have increase in acne, oily skin, and feelings of irritability. Conversely, when we have low testosterone, it leads to things like low libido, vaginal dryness, potentially voice changes, fatigue, aches and pains, memory lapses, loss of muscle mass, difficulty recovering from a workout, incontinence, depression, and sleep disruptions. And when we have estrogen, this kind of helps us keep all the balls in the air, right? We're trying to do all the things, and estrogen is very helpful in doing that. When we have high levels of estrogen, it can lead to feelings of mood swings, tender breasts, water retention, nervousness, irritability, anxiousness. It can lead to fibrocystic breasts as well as uterine fibroids. We experience that weight gain in the hips. And for cycling women, bleeding changes. Whereas low estradiol will lead to hot flashes, night sweats, vaginal dryness, foggy thinking, memory lapses, incontinence, tearfulness, depression, and sleep disruptions. So a lot of times when I go through some of the symptomology, my clients are like, check, check, check for some of these things. And we know we have some work to do in bringing balance back into our hormones. And that usually tends to be down the pathway of where are some of the blockages in our body that are preventing us from having the resources and tools to have the building blocks to make our sex hormones. Some things that contribute towards this, that chronic busyness that a lot of us experience, always on the go, always on the run, always have different things that you're trying to be committed to. I have a lot of clients that come through that are on a hormone replacement therapy, and a lot of times it is being poorly managed. I am not opposed to HRTs in any way, but I am a big fan of making sure that they're managed properly because we can have too much of a good thing and it can lead to really high hormone values. And initially, we might feel good, and then we're going to end up feeling not great and trying to figure out what's going on. Our environment has a big factor, right? The water that you're drinking, the environment that you live in, the products that you're using, both to clean your home and to clean your bodies, all play a role. And then EMF. So all of the technology that we are surrounded by definitely impacts what's happening in our body. All right, so some other things that we want to pay attention to. What's the interconnectedness between hormones and our gut health? It is quite significant. So when we have cortisol dysregulation, it does contribute towards our gut barrier breakdown. It starts to age. Our aging process actually alters the HPA axis, which leads to low morning cortisol, a flattened diurnal rhythm, which means not getting very good sleep patterns. When we have chronic stress, we'll have that cortisol dysregulation, which ends up weakening our secretory IgA, which is our primary immune soldier. This ends up weakening our gut barrier, and it does increase susceptibility to infections and to that formidable leaky gut. And then as we age, unfortunately, our hormones do start to decline and our detox becomes more stressed. So estrogen, progesterone, testosterone all decline with age. Low estrogen does affect tight junctions and our gut lining, which contributes towards that leaky gut. And reduced hormones also impact our bile flow, which thereby impacts our gut motility and is going to have a direct impact on our microbiome and having that good bacterial balance. And low testosterone declines muscle tone and starts to reduce that gut motility and our sphincter function, right? So the door's not closing or opening as well as it should be. Some other areas, melatonin and our circadian rhythm does start to change. So melatonin is another one of our hormones that starts to naturally decline, which then impacts our gut motility. We have a harder time with repair, and our immune system does become challenged. A circadian misalignment starts to infect our digestion and our gut flora composition. And the DHEA and gut mucosal protection. So DHEA declines steeply with age, reducing our resilience to stress and impairing our immune function. This comes back to that cortisol to DHEA ratio. Are we able to rebuild what we're breaking down? And do we need more support on that side of the scale? DHEA does support a mucosal immunity, and it has an impact in that anti-inflammatory cytokine production. Reduced hormones ends up impacting our bile flow, our gut motility, our microbiome diversity, and low hormones has a terrible impact on our sleep. It always impacts your sleep. Some things to note. Hormone influences on our gut motility. So when we end up with low thyroid, progesterone, and cortisol, all starts to slow our motility. When we have slow motility, it leads to SIBO-like symptoms. So that's small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. It leads to constipation and microbial overgrowth. This is where we'll also see an elevation in that indican marker, which is a failure to break down our proteins well. We might see an elevation in our fecal steatocrit, which is undigested fat. That's if you have the floating stool, if you have light colored stool, that's letting us know we've got too much fat in our stool. We're not processing it, and it's super important. Now, I do want to talk for just a moment on what I see with HRTs. Most commonly, I see people over-medicated, even if it's using a bioidentical kind. And a lot of times you feel better initially. And that's because we tend to be depleted. Again, we just talked about how all these hormones start to go down as we get older. And so then we're looking for support. We want to feel better. We want to get back to feeling like we used to. But this tends to be poorly managed. And what I see is that instead of maybe backing off of a hormone, we start to get different ones. So I will have people come in and they started off on progesterone, and the progesterone felt great at first, and then it stopped. And so then they were given estrogen and they were given testosterone. When people are giving pellets, they're in your body for 3 months, and there is a surge and a depletion over that time frame, which you feel great. And then as it tapers off, you don't feel so great. And so there are some ways just to help manage what's happening in your body so that you can have those replacements, but also making sure you have the right amounts. Another common thing that I see is that women get pushed into a luteal phase, which is more for a cycling woman. And when we go through menopause, we just shouldn't have that luteal phase anymore. So it's time for us to have less hormones, but it doesn't mean it's time to have no hormones. So finding that happy balance, but that also doesn't push us into a phase of life that is in the past, so that we can start to come into comfort on our new phase. All right, so let's look at the gut for a moment and what are we learning from our microbiome. So I feel like sometimes people hear a lot about the microbiome and in other times they don't hear anything about it. So here's just some examples of when we have an overgrowth of our opportunistic bacteria. So the thing to note is that we do want to have some opportunistic bacteria in the gut because it helps keep our immune system on high alert. It keeps everything working properly, but we don't want to have these crowding out, right? And so we can see that there's some crowding out happening on this example. And that starts to lead to a crowding out of that good microbiome, the commensal bacteria that needs to be in the right amount. And when we have this high bacteria, we start to have doorways opening for things like parasites and pathogens. The other one that I really like to look at here is this Metabolic Wellness Profile Lab. Indican is a marker of protein digestion. Total bile acids are giving me insight into that enterohepatic circulation and from liver to gallbladder into the digestive system and what gets swept back up into the liver for being cleaned up. This is still very useful for people who have had their gallbladder removed. It still tells me about that liver function and how much bile we're pushing out. And then 8-OHTG is a measure of oxidation. So oxidation is a normal byproduct of cellular function, but it does contribute towards degenerative diseases. So where is that at, and what do we need to do to kind of help bring that back online? All right, so what is the connection with aging? So I feel like this is a really good tool to see what's going on, right? So if we have stress over time, it's going to lead to cortisol and DHEA dysregulation, which is going to end up weakening our gut barrier. And that is going to then weaken our immune response. Now, conversely, as we have that stress over time, it's going to end up impacting our estrogen and progesterone production, which is both going to slow our motility, and it's going to impact our detox and bile flow. And that's going to end up having poor hormone clearance. We're going to have fat digestion, having a problem and affecting our gut health. When we have slow motility, it increases our bacterial overgrowth, and it leads to things like constipation, SIBO, yeast, and parasites. Parasites can be pretty challenging to get rid of. So how do we address all of these things? So I think it's important to note that it's not just labs. We do need to have diet taken into consideration, rest, exercise, stress reduction, strategic supplementation. When it comes to diet, I typically start off with an elimination diet. I do give my clients a full recipe guide. It gives them shopping lists and really good recipes, so we don't have to feel like we are being deprived of good food, feeling satiated, but also starting to take some of that inflammation and irritation out of the body. Rest cannot be overrated. So we need to be trying to go to bed before 10 p.m. at night and having a consistent wake up time. Kind of the ideal is a 6 a.m. wake up and a 10 p.m. bedtime. For every hour that you get of sleep before 10 p.m., it's like getting 2 hours compared to going to bed after 10 p.m. And then exercise. So I have as many, excuse me, people that are over exercising as under exercising. And this really comes back to how you're doing with your stress response and what's happening with that HPA axis. So if we are really depleted, if we're in an exhaustive phase, having a lot of exercise is really robbing from ourselves and using resources that we really need to rebuild our body for exercise. And then that prevents us from being able to do the things that we really want to do because we're very depleted and we're using that any resources available to get that exercise, that movement in. At the same time, being stagnant ends up creating more blockages in your body. We end up with poor lymphatic movement, which impacts your liver, it impacts your digestion and your detox pathways. And so it's a good idea to come into the right amount of balance. And that's something that I look at and work out with my clients. And then stress reduction. I don't think that could be overstated, right? We live in a toxic pool. We live in a stressful world. And so we need to have coping mechanisms. And that can be a variety of different things. It can be meditation. It can be movement. It can be going for walks, right? Listening to walking meditations is one of my favorite things to do. I'm also a big advocate for busy hands will help quiet a busy mind. So if you are someone who's like, there's no way I'm going to meditate, I cannot meditate, then maybe you need to do something that's more a little bit more movement oriented. So that can be knitting, crochet, gardening, painting, puzzles. So variety, coloring, right? There's a variety of things that we can do that keeps your hands in a repetitive motion, which allows our brains just to calm down. We can also, do journaling and prayer. There's lots of different ways to help ourselves. Going and getting some physical body work done, right? So going to a chiropractor, going to a massage therapist, getting Reiki treatments, going and sitting in a red light therapy or a sauna are all really awesome ways to help your body. And then there's strategic supplementation. Now, supplementation is based off of your lab results, lifestyle information. I am not an advocate of just heavy loading somebody with a bunch of supplements. So I'm looking very strategically, and I like to call it an on-ramp and an off-ramp. So there's certain ones we're going to use that are maybe going to be used for a longer period of time to really refill some coffers that are lacking. And then I have what I call like that 90-day protocol, something that we're going to use specifically during the reset portion of your program. And then there's typically an eradication. Almost all of us have stuff going on in our microbiome. And so we got to clear some things out. We got to add some things in. And then we're going to start tapering off these supplements because you shouldn't have to be on a whole litany of supplements and you want to have them be strategic. So just taking a bunch of supplements you heard about on a podcast or a blog or your friends like, oh, you got to use this. This is amazing. It's really based on you. It should be very personalized, and there should be a time frame of what you're trying to use them. Some tools that I like to use, right? So for our lymphatic system, which is so, so important, I really love gua sha. I think it's a great tool. It's very relaxing. It's sort of part of my bedtime routine is to use the gua sha for my face and down my neck. They have larger stones that you can use for your legs, body. You can use dry brushing. Castor oil packs are fantastic. There are lots of different tools that we can use to help with the food, right? So Green Chef, Healthy Eats, Factor Meals. There's a company, Thistle.co, Sakara Hungry Roots. So these are just all ideas for you to look at that you might take into part of your protocol. Having a cool, dark room is so helpful for getting good quality sleep. Red light therapy for sore muscles, for areas that are in need of repair, getting massage care, chiropractic care, meditation, somatic movement. So I don't want to overlook trauma, and a lot of us have some emotional trauma that we've been kind of carrying around. Somatic movement can be really helpful in moving some of that emotional trauma out of your body, which does show up in your labs, you guys. We can often see trauma kind of hiding in the wings when we look at lab work. And then the emotional freedom technique, that tapping. There's tons of videos on YouTube that are totally free that you can use, and you can do it anywhere. If you have kids that tend to get anxious, there are lots of different little tapping things that they can do that are not noticeable, like just tapping your pinky and your thumb together is just a great starter. And then again, busy hands. I'm a huge advocate of that. That is something that I need to do often. My brain will start going. So when I can just be busy, like in the garden in the wintertime, I like to do a little crochet or knitting, which is funny because I never thought I would do those kinds of things, but it does help my brain. So there you go. You never know what you might find enjoyable. So a little bit about me. My name is Christina. I have been there, you guys. I've had those feelings of depletion and overwhelm. And I was wondering, how was I going to keep up? I am an older mom. I have a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old, and I have to be able to keep up with them. And so, naps aren't really much of an option for me. And many years ago, when I first started having some gut issues coming up, when I went to the doctor, I was told I was just getting older and that everything looked normal. And I realized that, that's just not going to be a satisfactory answer for me. I need more information and I need ways that I can help with my longevity. So here is my family. We spend a lot of time with horses. My kids are big riders, and doing competitions around on the area, as well as they actually do Irish dance too. So I am often at one of these two activities. And I wanted to be able to show up feeling vibrant and not like the frazzled mom who's like, I don't know, just I feel like you got like 10 bags and you just like show up and you look like you've been run over by a bus. I did not want to be that person. And I definitely had those moments. I still think I have those moments once in a while. And what happened was I went to the school, the Institute of Integrative Nutrition, commonly referred to as IIN, many years ago. I think it was probably about 10 years ago now. And it was really great. I really liked it. I enjoyed it, but I didn't really feel like it was going to give me the answers that I needed. I wasn't looking just to coach lifestyle factors. I really wanted to help people dive a little bit deeper. I wanted more information. My background is actually working in corporate finance and actually in the financial industry. And so I spend a lot of time digging into details. And so I found that the details were lacking. And I ended up taking a mini course with functional diagnostic nutrition. And I loved the program. I learned so much about myself. And it really inspired me to start to bring that forward and help other people get to those healing holes that need to be filled. So I do have an offer for you. I don't typically do group programs, but I decided I would give it a try. And it's going to be a little bit of a hybrid. So both a personal program and a group program will include those 4 labs. So that's the stress and hormone profile, the metabolic wellness, mucosal barrier, and the GI map. And then both programs will have a 90-minute personal review. The difference between the two is that I'm going to do 6 group coaching calls. You're going to be held bi-weekly for about 3 months. And for the personal, you get 10 private coaching sessions. And there's an unlimited chat feature inside of Practice Better. I will open that for the group, but it will be a group chat. So I'll be able to pop in, but there will also be other members you guys can chat back and forth. For the unlimited, for the coaching, it is still a quote unquote 90-day program, but really I give you 10 sessions. So however long those 10 sessions take, when we get to the 6-month mark, we should have made it through all of our coaching program at that point. So if you're interested, just $1,000 off when you're working in a group versus when you're working privately with me. And so this is your opportunity to take your health into your own hands. When you have tried all of the diets, you guys, all of the supplements, you've taken medications, and you're still not getting the results that you're looking for, you're going to end up with that digestive issue, crepey skin, loss of muscle mass, weight that gets stuck around our middle and we can't get rid of. There really, truly are answers and actions that you can take to become that superstar senior and not somebody who feels like they're just making it across the finish line. So here is some contact information for me. You can always send me an email. You can contact me on my website. You can always contact me on Instagram. Actually, I get a lot of people reach out to me on Instagram, and that handle is at Christina M. Cole. So hopefully I will hear from you soon. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate it.